Alrighty, folks, welcome back to the Mushing Alaska podcast. This is your hosts, Brendan and Sean Underwood, and we are super excited for this next episode. We're doing this while the Iditarod's going on, and it's just lots going on in our world. Just want to give you a quick reminder, if you're not following us already, mushing.alaska.podcast is our page on Instagram. We have a Mushing Alaska page on YouTube as well. We've been putting out videos for the Iditarod. Please check us out, follow us, subscribe to us. That way you're not missing out. We're literally trying to do at least 1 or 2 videos every single day. And I don't want to take too much because I'm excited that we have this guest on. So I'm going to actually turn it over to Sean so he can kind of give a proper welcoming to our guest.
Yeah, we'll welcome Sebastian Schnuelle. Sorry if I don't pronounce your name perfectly. But this guy's like the ultimate ambassador of mushing. He's been in the Iditarod 7 times. Let's see how I do, Sebastian. 7 times. They got 2005 through 2011. He finished in the 2nd, 6th, 7th, 10th. And then another finished every race he participated in. He got 1999 Yukon Quest. He ran it. We got 2004, 5, 6, 7. He ran the Yukon Quest, and then in 2009 won it, and then came 2nd place in 2011. So this guy's, he's had an incredible mushing career. Maybe he'll come out of retirement. I don't know. But thanks for coming and hanging out with us. Welcome, man.
Yeah, I'm definitely not coming out of retirement. I'm feeling even more retired now, being on this side of the game and not being out on the trail, because it kind of was a progression from mushing to online to reporting on the snow machine to then getting an even cushier job, being a race judge, being flown around. And now, a few years later, here I am sitting at home.
Nice. Well, I want to look at this year's Iditarod, and I know that I got a tiny bit of a hunch you've been following the race. And right now is people are making those decisions about where to take their 24-hour rest. You've had a really warm day yesterday and night, I think, as well. So it's just warmer temps and difficult decisions, and everyone has their plan that's probably not going well as far as their plan. And what are you seeing in the front of the pack here? You got looks like do you have it pulled up at all, or on your laptop?
Right now.
I was gonna say I can pull it up too for you if you guys want.
I'm looking at the tracker here and stuff. So what I did before this, let's start in Jentna. Let's actually start off where this race started off and went. What I found really striking this year, not a single drop dog in Jentna. Only one team staying in Jentna, and that was Wade Maas. Everybody else going through Jentna, and he only stayed 2 hours and 5 minutes. So the race kind of sets the tone right there, with people being with what Brent did. It's always whatever somebody does as a winning strategy. Back in my days, it was like skipping Shaktulik or skipping Elim. Those are the new moves. Whenever somebody does something different, new, that's what people pick up on. So I found it very interesting that already in Jentna, only one team stayed in a checkpoint. In Skrentna, same thing, only 11 teams, a third of the field stayed in Skrentna. Makes it really easy for the checkpoint personnel, not much straw to rake. There was 4 drop dogs in Skrentna, so pretty interesting, really fast run times, like Ryan Reddington, 2:56, Jentna to Skrentna. I mean, pretty dang fast. But the tone was already set that Finger Lake, 12 teams stopped, a third of the field, once again. Strangely enough, then in Rainy Pass, the noisiest of all of the checkpoints, 20 teams stopped. So that had something to do with the heat of the day, people not wanting to run into the heat of the day. And when you look at teams like Ryan Reddington, getting in there at 9:33 in the morning, that's not the best of time of day to get in there, because that basically forces you to leave in the heat of the day. And then when you look what happened to Ryan now, Same thing now here, Nikolai, he was faced with the same decision. He gets in there very early in the morning. So once you get off schedule, so to speak, that's a dangerous route to go down. Back in my day when I raced, I honestly didn't really care much about checkpoints neither. All I cared for, especially in years like this where it's warm, is daytime. I would periodically not run past noon and probably not leave before 4:30 or 5. So now when you look at the teams doing that and look at their dog numbers, look at Jesse Holmes, look at Dan Caduce, and look at the teams who haven't run quite as optimal as a daytime schedule as they could have run. Even Brent to a certain extent this year. Mille Posselt, Mille was really humming and hawing about what to do. And Nikolai, should I go? Should I not? She had a game plan, but she also realized that the time of the day she was on was anything but optimal. So when you look at that, a Dan Caduce on paper is 4.5 hours behind Ryan Reddington leaving Nikolai, I do think he's in a much better position. Because his daytime hour running is much more favorable. And that way, he's also driving a larger team. Nick Petit is another one. He gets at 7 o'clock in the morning into Nikolai, and then he goes like, oh, now what? Oh, I guess I'm taking my 24. Taking his 24 is not going to do him any damn good, because then he's going to leave at 8 o'clock in the morning again. So he's running straight back into the heat of the day. And if you look at the forecast for tomorrow, it's even warmer there. Today, they got up to freezing. Tomorrow, they're getting up to like 38. So personally, I've always been a real big fan of running by daytime, avoiding the dead of night, like trying not to do runs, 1 a.m. to 5 a.m., but mainly staying out of the heat of the day. And that's going to be interesting to see now. What will the effect be? It's not that bad to run into the heat of the day before you're 24, because your dogs do get the 24 to rejuvenate a bit. It's really bad to run into the heat of the day out of your 24 or after your 24, because once your team loses their speed, then you probably won't regain it. So when I look at the numbers here, and probably from 11th place on, Hunter Keefe leaving Nikolai at almost 4 o'clock, personally, that's where I would have wanted to be. I personally wouldn't have worried that much about the ones being ahead of me. That being said, by heat of the day, Brent and Jesse Holmes are also on a perfect schedule now. They ran till the heat of the day, and then they shut it down. And that distance they have, which is quite a bit, I don't know the exact mileage, but for Jesse, that's at least 20 plus miles he has on the teams which left Nikolai at 4 o'clock. That's a nice little gap to have at this stage in the game. So personally, I say Brent and Jesse are truly fully ahead of their chase pack. How much damage the other ones did, time will tell.
I want to follow up when you start bringing up the point on the dogs. And by the way, Sebastian, killer,
dude,
and
holy shit!
I'm just like, there's so many things I want to say about your analysis there. But the only person that has 11 dogs right now is Brent Sass, and that's really is an interesting point that you bring up.
And Miller.
Posselt.
Okay, I didn't see that. That's just, I don't know. Is that a little bit concerning to only have 11 dogs left at this earlier junction in the race? Still like barely even a third of the way in.
Well, I don't know what's going on in his team. I saw his interview where he talks about why he dropped those dogs. Are the other 11 completely solid? Are they not? I don't know. It's not going to help if you have somebody breathing down your neck like Dan Caduce with 14. Those extra 3 dogs are feelable. As Brent talked about in his interview, it's one thing to have 11 dogs pulling and have another dog in the bag. So if he now gets another dog in the bag at some point on a hilly run, let's say over to Schagel, over to Iditarod, it's, if they're all healthy, if he doesn't load any, it actually makes life easier. A little bit of less food, 12 woodies less to put on. You're a little more efficient. 11 is a very nice number. I loved driving between 10 and 12. That was my favorite dog number, but not necessarily leaving Nikolai. So this probably weighs on Brent, and he's not used. Well, he used to drop a lot of dogs. I mean, he used to be down to very small teams, but not lately. Lately, he has gotten used to keeping it together and driving larger teams. So this will be feelable. Same as Miller, she drove a relatively small team here in the Quest 450 with 9 dogs, but Michelle was out of reach for her in that. So again, personally, without seeing the teams and knowing are there little issues and risks or wherever, personally, I would prefer to drive either Pete Kaiser's team or drive Dan Caduce's team, just looking at the pure dog numbers, not actually seeing the dogs in front of me. Kelly Meixner looks really nice too.
Yeah, man, the Pete Kaiser seemed like he had a little extra speed out on the trail between Nikolai and McGrath, and it's been interesting watching the speeds. Like there's, from what I recall, the trail from, Nikolai McGrath's like fairly flat, but I remember the year I ran, all the front runners had a bunch of overflow, and then because part of my strategy was to hang back in the but last third of the race. It's a pretty strong strategy, some may say, right, Sebastian? But the trail set up nicely and it froze and it was fast. But I'm wondering, I'm sure there's some variables in the trail conditions, the heat of the day, but you've seen, a lot of these teams being able to hold over 8 miles an hour, like through the heat of the afternoon, which was pretty impressive. And yeah, see this like a 2 miles an hour, but kind of difference between some of the higher speeds and some of the lower speeds going on there. And that's kind of interesting. I'll be interested to see like those run times.
But holding the speed is one thing, but what does it do to your team? Even Brent talking about one of his young dogs overheating, and that's why he had to drop it.
Right.
So it's not necessarily a good thing to keep your speed up high in the heat of the day. It's one thing what they can do, but it's another thing what it will do to them down the line. Also, a big difference. Do you have very furry, hairy dogs like Miller does? Or do you have a more leaner, short-coated dog? Color plays a role there too. I mean, this was sunny, so if you have a whole black team, we used to carry those white windbreakers for these conditions. Time will tell what this all does to the team. I mean, basically they're a quarter into the race right now with 260 mile mark and Nikolai, So there's so much trail and variation still to come. Being out front, if you're too close to the trail breakers, that's not good neither. Then looking at where the trail breakers are, though, they're nicely well ahead on the way to Iditarod. So that trail should have set up nicely for them, I cannot see Brent go past Ofer with the fact that he's down to 11. I wonder what Jesse will do. Somebody got to always be out front, which is fine to be as long as you have a good trail to deal with. But I remember myself, I think actually in 08, I came into Takotna, I think in third place, and Mark Nordman comes up to me and says, Sebastian, what's your plan? I was like, I'm just going to stay very short and then I'm going. He was like, yeah, you might want to think about that. Just to let you know, the trail breakers left 2 hours ago. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm doing my 24 here in Takotna.
Why is that a deal breaker?
Well, if the trail, so at the time it was snowing hard, and if the trail breakers are that close to you, the trail has no time to set up. So I would have been driving through ankle deep snow. There, when I give it 24 and I have somebody else going to Ophir or hopefully beyond that, well, they packed it down. So at the time, I was like, no, I'm staying in Takotna, although I hadn't even planned on it. This year, that seems to be all less of a factor because it's not snowing. To my knowledge, there hasn't been fresh snow over the last couple of days. The trail breakers are nicely ahead, so they all should have a pretty decent trail going to Iditarod, which can be really, really low snow and very mogul.
And it is kind of dependent on it cooling down, which will eventually cool down as according to the forecast. But the trail the trail front to Iditarod, the 1 year I got to do it, it was pretty fast actually, but it's like not a very highly trafficked trail. But of course there's been the trail breakers and the Iron Dog, and there's been traffic on it. But yeah,
tomorrow is a warm day. Tomorrow is a warm day. So in my opinion, taking an early 24 would really help teams because the dogs then also can rest in a warm day. I mean, if they're calling for 38 degrees tomorrow, if you get a good parking spot in Takotna on the hill where they can sleep in the sun, or even in Ophir, where staying in your 24 in Ophir in those temperatures is not a big deal. It's one thing to stay in Ophir at 50 below and having to melt snow, but in those conditions, again, personally, I would lead to stopping rather earlier and then letting this warmer day pass by. That being said, how much of a weather forecast do these mushers see? Do they even know that tomorrow is the last really warmish day and then it's starting to cool down? Personally, looking at that, I think it would make a big difference to rest the team in the warmer temperature tomorrow.
Yeah, I was keeping an eye on like you said, Sass and Holmes, they got a decent lead and cushion to work with, but like with as aggressive of a race as this has started to be, as you pointed out, like with kind of some pretty bold starts across the board, I'm kind of interested to see if you're going to see some of these. I mean, Dan Caduce is like in what, like 12th place or something, and it sounds like 13th place right now, and it sounds like he's about as much of a top 5 favorite in 13th place as it stands right now as any of the guys in the top 5 are. And looking at Wade Mars is taking it super conservatively,
and now he's 15th.
Short runs, short rests. He was near last place almost earlier this morning. I'm kind of excited. I personally am just such a fan of mushers doing the sneaky, we're back here and we're doing our thing and no one's paying attention to us, and then you blink and all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, they're in 4th place. Who do you think from the back of the pack? Do you think Dan Caduce and maybe Wade Mars, or maybe Hunter Keefe? I mean, he's been I'm really impressed with his whole mushing season in general. I mean, what do you think about some of those guys in between 5th and 15th place?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Hunter, Eddie Burke, considering they're rookies, they're running incredibly well. I mean, they run very structured races. I mean, they're running top of the pack races being rookies. I mean, they're right within the mix right there, which obviously running under Aaron and Remy, they have that knowledge advantage, which somebody, who doesn't have that type of mentorship doesn't have, but you still have to pull it off. So they're doing extremely well. that being said, when it comes to like winning, there very likely will be situations coming down the trail where their experience level won't allow them to run like a winning strategy. But, you know, will they be able to maybe maintain a top 10? I think so. Dan Caduce, I don't think he's hungry enough. For Dan, I think to him, it's really important to have a super well-looking team. But I personally don't see him as this go-getter hardcore racer. He's a super nice guy, super good dog musher. But I don't see him being the grinding it out type of person who's like, I need to stay up front and I want to catch up to these front runners. Maybe I misjudge him, but I don't see that. That being said, when I look at other mushers, even when I watch their pre-race interviews a little bit, somebody like Matt Failer seems to have a little more grit this year than he had in the past. When in the past he was content to be running nicely in the first third of the race, but I didn't feel the real grit in him, you know. So when I look at that, like Jesse has grit. Jesse Holmes this year, he really has grit. Like he knows. I forgot who told that to me, you know, many years ago. Some musher said, if you haven't won a Iditarod by your 6th or 7th try, you never will, because you get used to losing, so to speak. And there seems to be a certain truth in that. At some point, you really need to want to turn that page and put it all on the line. And there you can read a lot of the mindsets when you watch those interviews, the pre-race interviews, or even the interviews now. Who is really determined, you know? And there's definitely a few people who are driving very nice teams, but I don't quite sense that determination. Richie Deal, he's hungry, you know. Richie's hungry. Jesse's hungry, you know. Kelly seems surprisingly hungry, you know. Miller, you can never count her out. I mean, she is tough, and oh boy, is she competitive. So, you know, Matt Hall knows how to win. He has won a Quest. I don't know much about his dog team, you know, age, experience, and anything. You know, personally, Wade Mars, 14th place, 5 o'clock. He is not that far off the pace, 5 hours from Ryan Reddington. So looking at past races, if you ask me today, I see Wade ahead of Ryan by no, but I could be wrong. You know, Ryan has more of a tendency to not finish, to be handed back throughout the standings. I didn't want to say not finish, but be handed back in the standings. Will it happen to him again? I don't know. I sure hope not for him. But you know, looking at the past, the potential is there.
So yeah, he's had a pretty, you know, out in front early kind of guy. Go ahead, Brendan.
Yeah, so you know, we're just kind of talking about strategy. So we've got the front of the pack is getting into McGrath. We've got one of the hottest days coming up. I mean, does it not make all the sense in the world for all these people to just stop in McGrath and take their 24 right now? Or do you think they're going to push through?
So McGrath is too early. So let's say if you're on the way to McGrath right now, and you want to shut it down now at 8 o'clock, that's not necessarily the best time to shut it down again. So you're much better off to push more into Takatna or even potentially into Ophir. So let's say if you push into Takatna and you get to Takatna at 10 o'clock at night, with your starting time differential, you can you can leave at midnight. It's even that is not quite ideal. Then I would push even further to Ophir and try to get to Ophir, let's say at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning, which would get me leaving at 3 o'clock in the morning, which then, if I would do a nice long 8-hour run till 11 in the morning, I'm back on schedule on the way to Iditarod.
Okay.
So shutting it down in McGrath for the 24, I wouldn't see beneficial at all.
Okay.
Pushing it into Ophir, if I have the dog team for it to do that long run, I think it's a given that Jesse and Brent will both go to Ophir. Time will tell, will they do the 24 there or will they not? But technically, it sets them up on a beautiful schedule both. The ones who started in McGrath, that's a long haul to go to Ophir. Possible, yeah, but Takotna is already a long run, but Ophir is a really long run. Like in 08, I couldn't.
Wait, you're saying wait, hold on. You said those that started in McGrath going to Ophir is a long run. You mean if they started in Nikolai, right?
Nikolai, Nikolai. Those starting in Nikolai, to make it to Takotna is easy. To make it to Ophir, that's a real haul. That could be a long run. If it takes you 6 to McGrath, and then another 2.5 and 2.5. That's an 11-hour run. Not everybody has trained for that. Not everybody is ready to that. So I can see quite a few of those who stopped in Nikolai to run to Takotna, but not making it to Ophir. And then once again, that is exactly that little bit of a distance which Brent and Jesse have created themselves, with being kind of on the same schedule, but being one checkpoint ahead in Ophir.
That's a pretty impressive that that they created that distance. It's not very obvious to me, at least, how they did that. They just kind of attacked 3 extra miles onto this run and 4 onto that one, and next thing you know, they have this nice little gap with all the chasing pack. Yeah, that's gonna be so. A lot of these guys leaving Nikolai probably make one long run to Takotna and take their 24. You're gonna see at least some of them do that, and then maybe you might see some of them stop in Takotna for 3 or 4, or stop in Takotna, and then maybe they're gonna go to Iditarod. But that'd be kind of bold given the forecast and given everything. So I don't know. Yeah. I like that, the McGrath to Takotna Ophir. You got McGrath to Takotna is what, 20, 30 miles? Was it 18 miles? It says. And then Takotna to Ophir is 23 miles, right? So you have flexibility here, but yeah, of course, going to Nikolai to Ophir would be pretty aggressive. Might be too much, to be able to build your team back up and renovate their energy, in only 24 hours, right? So
absolutely, there's not quite even the need for it. One thing I personally even liked about Takotna, it's one of those checkpoints you can actually afford yourself to leave with a questionable dog because you can drop it 20 miles later.
Yes.
So I always really enjoyed that about 24ing in Takotna. Hot water and all of that is just great. And plus, I mean, their burgers and their food at all, for me, was always like, Takotna is it.
Yeah.
When I had to plan to not stop there. But Takotna is a good place to pull over. And it sets you also up nicely to go to Iditarod. You pass over, you camp out, and then you nicely make it to Iditarod. It's a good place to be. That being said, Ophir, those 2 hours, 2.5 hours is a nice little cushion to have. It's going to be interesting to see. What I also did is I looked at the number of runs people have done, which is pretty interesting. Nick Petit only has done 4 runs to Nikolai. Dan Caduce has run 7 runs to Nikolai. That's a big difference. So Dan Caduce has never really run more than 6 hours to this point. He has actually done a lot of 5-hour runs. But then when you look at his spacing of run rest time, it's so nicely even. You know, Nick has done, even in the past, done some oddball schedules, and he's doing it once again. Sometimes they work for him beautifully, other times they don't. But he has done only 4 runs to Nikolai, where then Ryan Reddington has done 5. Brent has done 6 to his camping spot. Kelly Makesner did 6. Jesse Holmes did 6. So it's pretty interesting to just look at that in itself, how different the different mushers manage their teams. When you look back to the way old Quest we talked about, the 2011 Quest, Dallas Seavey, lots of short runs, lots of short rests at the time, and right at the end he won it. You know, he displaced me to second. So you know, it's all condition based, that these old time strategies like Dan runs, if he's hungry enough, you know, I would even say Jesse runs, Pete Kaiser run, they can lead to very good success. You know, where an unorthodox schedule like Nick Petit, 4 runs to Nikolai, now 24 in Nikolai, the odds are stacked a little bit against him that that's going to work.
Yes, given the forecast too, and yeah, that's a good way of looking at how many runs they've done, and yeah, I mean, there's different styles. There's a lot of right ways to be like good at this. You know, there's the longer runs, maybe slightly longer rests, and then you got the you know, Dan Caduce, Dallas Seavey of the 5-hour runs, 3-hour rests, or 4-hour rests. And that's something I wanted to talk about, is when you're resting your dogs. And this, I've always been kind of curious. I feel like I never have like my thing figured out, you know, my exact checkpoint routine. But like, you know, how quickly are you, by the time you decide I'm camping at let's say at a checkpoint, are you going from you've stopped, you've parked, to the dogs are sleeping? And are you always like, do you probably switch up, but are you feeding them before they go to sleep, after they go to sleep, both? You know, like, because it not like taking a 4-hour rest, it's not just as simple as like you pressed off and now they're resting 4 hours. Like, is it noisy around them? Are they like tired, or are they just like kind of rolling around and hanging out? You know, if you can get your dogs fed and bedded down in 7 minutes, and versus someone else, you know, and you only have 10 dogs, right? You can get them rested quicker, right? That's another advantage to having a smaller team. You can take care of them and then get them their rest faster. But yeah, like, talk about like strategies into maximizing the efficiency of some of these 2, 3, 4, 5-hour rests that these guys are giving their dogs.
So back in the day, I had my handlers stopwatch me with every move I did. How many times I would walk to the front of the team, how many, in what order I would do what, and to what overall time that would lead me. That being said, there is no fixed set. It really depends on, do you have water available? Do you not? Do you have to melt snow or not? So when I used to camp out, the very, very, very first thing I would do was get my cooker going. I wouldn't even go to the front of my team. I literally would stop, put my hook in, get my cooker going, because that was going to be the slowest determining factor of when I can feed him, especially if I had to melt snow and didn't even carry any water with me. If I would go, let's say, to a checkpoint like Nikolai, where I know I have warm water, of course, my routine would be a lot different one. You know, I would, because I know that feeding my dogs as such is going to be a fast process. So there, after planting my hooks, if I had a volunteer holding my team, I would actually already take the booties off on my way up front and shove them all in my pockets, not on the ground, where I have to pick them up again. I would shove every single every booty I could. I just had a little bag made where I shoved all the booties in. I already had my massage oils with me. So before I would even come into Nikolai, I would have gotten my massage oils into certain pockets, always the same pockets. So I wouldn't even have to think about where they're at, but they would already be pre-warmed. My Zalox, my Algebra would be warm. I would already have 2 wrist wraps on me. So in Nikolai, in go my hooks. On my way, when I walk up front, my booties go off in my pockets, so I don't have to pick him up again. I do a quick exam on their wrists and their shoulders, and the slightest thing I would find, I would already slap a quick wrist wrap on. I go to the front of the team. By the time I'm the front, put in the front hook, that's when the poor volunteer can finally leave my team alone. If the straw was nicely up front, which I had hoped for, I would cut the bail open. On the way back, I would distribute all the straw. So with one walk up and down, they were basically massaged, their booties were off, and the straw was down. That was 10 minutes at most.
Wow.
Then in Nikolai, knowing I get warm water, I would get into making the dog food. Personally, I always said, if it took me more than 45 minutes to have a massaged, bedded down, and me be in the sleeping bag, I fucked up. 40 was my goal. 35 was doable when I had a small team, like 10, 11 dogs. But anything above 45 minutes, to me personally, I found a detriment. I didn't snack much on the trail, most definitely not close to a checkpoint. So for me, it was always a saying, big meal within half an hour, and like a real big meal. That then I never wanted to pull the hook earlier than 2.5 hours after they were done eating. So if I would have the meal in them after 30 minutes, theoretically, I was like, digestion-wise, I can get away with pulling the hook after 2.5 hours. Personally, at the time, I tried to not give him less than 4.5. You know, when you look now, that number seemed to have gone down to 3.5. There's quite a few 3.5-hour rests now, which back in my day, I hadn't quite mastered those then, you know. I never really wanted to have them run with a lot of water in their belly, so to speak, because, you know, when you watch them, after 2.5, 3 hours, a lot of the dogs get up and piss. And personally, that's when I pulled the hook. When I missed that spot and they all curled back down, then they were actually sometimes harder to get going after like in 6. Then when you get that spot nicely, they're all getting up, they're all taking off their blankets, they're all going for a pee. Oh, cool. Now you're getting some booties on, and guess what? We're leaving. You know, so the problem in the checkpoints, and that's why Brent does what he does, there come those pesky Iditarod insider guys want to talk to you, and those Sebastians and those Seans and those Bruce Lees, and next thing you know, there's 15 minutes gone down the drain. Or in Nikolai, it's a hell of a walk to the school.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I saw a little video of Nick in a sled today, you know. So Nikolai was one of those where I was like, man, is it even worth my time to go to the school? Or am I not just better off curling up next to my dogs? Where in Takotna, I usually would park right behind the checkpoint building, and I could almost go out in slippers. You know, so that was also a determining factor for me where I would rest and how long and what. Because basically, every walk counts. Everything counts. Like how much effort do you have to put into feeding and maintaining your dogs? I love Nikolai, but boy, that was a walk to the school. You know, camping out, you know, especially, let's say, if like, I didn't watch Brand's video in Nikolai, but boy, if you go into Nikolai and you even grab the warm water and put it in the garbage bag in your cooler, well, then when you pull over to camp, you're styling. You still have that warm water, and you camp out, and you avoid the insider guys. That being said, I saw the insider guys talking to them today, so
they still got
they almost avoided them. It's not only the insider guys. When you're in a village, you want to talk to the locals. You have friendships. Of course, I would have wanted to talk to Marty. Of course, I would have wanted to talk to Phil Rankel and so on. So that's always that catch-22. You want to race, but you want to socialize. That's why I personally always tell mushers, enjoy your first races where you have time to talk to people, where you're 6-7 hours in checkpoint, and you can socialize, you can meet people, it's great. I love that part about it. That's actually what I wanted to do when I wanted to run the race one more time in 2017. It was like, oh, cool, I can take time and gap to people and not just 3.5, 4 hours and I gotta be going.
Yeah, I definitely get caught in that trap. And I wasn't necessarily like super dead set on trying to be competitive, but I just remember on the first race, like being so stoked to be at a checkpoint and be like, oh yeah, there's that musher that I know. And oh, what are they doing over there? It looks like, oh, he's taking the booties off. And I hasn't taken the booties off yet. And oh, he's doing this kind of massage. I should try that, and you just like you get way more dialed in alone, personally for me, dialed in when you're just alone with your dogs and you have no distractions and nothing else to think about except for how do I take care of these guys, get them some food, get me some food. But yeah, I mean, there's also something to be said for like Wade. Did you see that interview? And he was like, I love checkpoints. I prefer checkpoints. Everything's more efficient. The water's right there. The straw's right there. The food's right there. And I'm like, well, that's actually, I guess, a good point, because you do burn like 5-10 minutes loading up the straw onto the thing and getting ready to go camp. I mean, what do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. And there is no one size fits all. I mean, there's
Right.
33 different ways to run the race, and there is no good or bad. It's what matches your personality and your training the most. If you're somebody who is not good at camping, well, yeah, the checkpoints are much more efficient. If you're somebody like Brent, I think, who camps most of his life, for him, a checkpoint is more inefficient. There is no good or bad or right or wrong. Every musher is different. So while we have been gabbing here, Ryan Reddington and Jesse Holmes both gone through Takotna. So I'm pretty sure, I expect Ryan to pull over in both pull through McGrath. I expect Ryan to stop in Takotna. I think Jesse will go to Ophir. What do you guys think?
I think Jesse and Brent are going to Ophir because that would put them at like a 60-something mile run, which is a good distance. And yeah, I don't think. I mean, if Ryan goes to Ophir, I think that would not be the move for him personally. But yeah,
what do you think about Kelly and Richie?
Oh my God, I'm so stoked for Kelly. I've gotten to talk to him a few times. Yeah, I mean, damn, Richie's team knows they're getting close to McGrath. He's going 9.5 miles an hour. Brent's going 9.2. That's some decent speeds. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Kelly said in that interview, he had some dogs like a little sore from the moguls to Nikolai, and but yeah, I mean, it seems like he's setting himself up nicely, and he's right there in that chase pack. I think I'd give Richie a little bit of an edge just because he's been running this race every year, and he's it feels like it's his time to kind of have even more of a breakthrough than he already has. I think he finished top 10 last year. So yeah.
Miller must be a little disheartened. She has been passed on the fly by Matt Fehler and Pete Kaiser both.
That's
always a thing when you. Personally, I was never worried when somebody would pass me, let's say, in a checkpoint and leave earlier than me. But if I would get passed on the trail, that was always a sure sign of like, oh crap, So
Yeah.
Miller seems to be definitely at that point right now where, she left ahead of him, and they're both well ahead by now.
Yeah, that's the interesting, that you've observed that Milla is she's the last 3 years, including this one, puts together kind of like a ragtag team of dogs, and it's she's had 2 incredible Iditarods. But yeah, it's I wonder if that plays a factor when you have 2 dogs from this kennel and 3 dogs from that kennel and 4 dogs from that she has that are hers. You got quite a that just leaves for a lot of room for a lot of variables. And yeah, she seemed a little flustered in the interview, and hopefully she gets them 24 maybe soon and gets that speed back.
Aaron Peck, 13 dogs. He has run very small teams for a number of years. I mean, his 10th place finish last year with that super small team was pretty amazing. So he must be stoked to leaving Nikolai with 13.
Yeah, and I remember him mentioning he's kind of got a young team this year, and he split them up for the Quest, right? You've been. Yeah. I was out of town for the Quest, but he had 2 teams, I think, right in that, and had split them down kind of down the middle. So, what do you know? Yeah, what did you know about his team from that race?
Well, I mean, he used that Quest 300, Quest 450 as a training run. So did Mille Posselt.
Mm-hmm.
Mille took some dogs she wanted to evaluate. As you said, Aaron divided his dogs between Mela. Mela actually had his more experienced dogs, and he was driving the younger ones. I mean, you couldn't set yourself up much better than doing a 450 at the time when he did.
Mm-hmm.
And Willoughby, Mela, she's like a super good dog driver, and also her dog hair is like top notch. So I think that shows in Aaron's team right now that he has a large group of dogs which had finished that Quest 450. And he didn't do anything crazy or stupid in that Quest 450. They maintained the dogs nicely. So I think it's paying dividends for him right now.
Yeah, and Jessie Royer, I don't know. She did she run the Quest, one of the Quests as well?
No, she did not.
No, she didn't. Okay, she did the pedigree, and she did some of the lower 48 races.
No, she didn't do the pedigree neither. No, she didn't do the pedigree neither.
The Idaho Sled Dog Challenge, maybe that was
one of those down there. Yeah.
Yeah.
She says she has a young team. That being said, you can never really count out Jessie of much neither. Will it be enough to win, to get into Nikolai at 1:30 in the afternoon? Probably not, but knowing Jessie, she will probably climb up in the ranks towards the race quite a bit. That being said, one big storm, I mean, look at 2014, where the dice were completely rolled new when the teams were even leaving White Mountain. You just never know. There's still a lot of possibilities.
A lot of race left, and then
a lot of possibilities.
Riley Dyke, he's been trying to kind of get a competitive race together the last couple tries, and just had, obviously the Iditarod always throws a wrench in your plans, so it's good to see him kind of near the front. He's in the front half of the race. And Christian Turner, coming out of Australia, just hopping on the runners basically, and he's got some quality experience, having 2 really impressive Iditarod finishes in 2014 and 15, and now he's running, by my understanding, a fairly young team, but a very well-trained team this year that ran a bunch of the mid-distance races, and it looks like he's starting off on the right foot.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, leaving Nikolai at 5 in the afternoon, it's textbooks. I mean, he got in there right in time at 12:30. But yeah, I mean, that whole middle group there right now, Riley, Wade, Christian, they're all on the textbook schedule, so to speak.
And then, looking at the back of the pack, not necessarily worrying about, where they're finishing. I mean, Ramey said that Ramey Smith, he said he's like ran his dogs like 1,000 miles in training, which is like pretty slow, very low mileage for this day and age. And you can see he's kind of building up his team. He's going shorter runs and taking it kind of slow and seeing how they develop through the race, and kind of doing his Iditarod training in the first third of the Iditarod, doing a lot of it and seeing how they develop. And I don't know a whole lot about Bridget Watkins. I don't know, and Eric Kelly. Do you know anything about those guys?
No, very little too. I mean, they are what I would call in the adventure stage. For them, this is being part of the race, winning not an equation, money probably not an equation in the sense of that they're counting on prize money. For them, it's about being part of it. There's a whole that whole group, which I would say not being a Nikolai right now, minus Ramey. I mean, Ramey is still on the way to Nikolai, but the whole rest of that group, I'm actually surprised to see Deke Nagtebron, to see him.
Yeah, same here.
I would have more seen Deke with Wade and that group.
Yep.
Bailey and Jed, Joanna, Jago, they are all kind of where I expected them to be. I am a little worried about, Greg Vitello being so far behind.
I was thinking that's
10.5 hour rest in Rainy. Yeah,
10.5 hours.
He rested 10. I think, I don't want to say anything wrong, but I think he rested 10.5 hours in Rainy. Which you don't really do yourself any favors with things like that in such a fast-paced race. If you're in a group of mushers, that's one thing. But boy, if you're there that by yourself, 11 hours, 10:57. So,
and I'm
he's
like,
not doing himself any favors back there. So it's kind of Gerhard and him. They're leapfrogging a bit. They're together back there, so they better stick together.
Yeah, and that's something that you see. You saw like in the Willow this year, where you got a couple mushers that are at the back of the pack, and then one of them scratches, and now the one musher is just by himself. And then that's something that if you don't maintain that competitiveness in the Iditarod, not necessarily competitive in the sense of trying to win, but just to stay kind of with the race is pace. And you got all these volunteers sitting around at the checkpoints, they're all sleep deprived and ready to go home or on to the next checkpoint. So they don't like sitting around and waiting 18 hours for the last two mushers to show up. And so, Gerhard, he had a tough end of his race last year. I've been there. There's a couple other mushers in here. I think Katie Jo Dieter, who looks like she's doing great. I guess she had a couple of hiccups along the way, but it doesn't seem to have slowed her down. But yeah, really, you hope that Gerhard can keep up kind of with the group, given the tough ending to his year last year. He's got to really prioritize kind of catching up. And of course, Greg as well, Greg Vitello.
Jason Mackey, I'm surprised to see him back there too.
Yeah, I was wondering, I was like, I feel like, he ran the Knick 200, I think, and he was kind of chilling on that race and using it as a training run. And I was curious to see if that's kind of how he would run Iditarod, or if he was going to make some moves. But I mean, he did rebuild his kennel, and maybe this is like the start of something, kind of start of phase 2 of his career.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was reading something from their kennel that said exactly that this is more of like a kind of enjoying this. This is kind of in memory of Lance, but it's not going to be like a competitive run for him. That's kind of at least what the post kind of made it sound like to me. Sebastian, I wanted to ask you kind of on that note, we were just kind of talking about as a race judge, Can you talk about what goes into the decision to like kind of ask someone to scratch or, you know, force them, or just can you give us a little more behind the scenes of what that's like?
Well, there we are treading dangerous waters.
Yeah, there's a lot of tension, Brennan, and some people have been with.
Mark Norman might not be a happy camper, depending on what I say.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I
Right.
understand. Well, I mean,
So I mean, the main thing when it comes down to that is actually the opposite. As a race judge, our goal is to facilitate people to finish. So I see my job out there as almost more being a mentor than a race judge. So these teams in the back, often they're obviously struggling or unfamiliar and need a bit of advice, need a bit of reassurance. And we had it here in the Quest 450. Conor McMahon, the last team, you know, we did what's called a wellness check on him. I took the snow machine and drove out to see him. Had some airline kennels with me, so I was ready to pluck him off the trail if needed. And when talking to him, I realized the dogs are fine. He is a problem. And that's when my approach switched to let's facilitate that he finishes. Not in the sense of aiding and giving help. No, that's not allowed and that's not the part. But basically walking him through and telling him what's going on and why it's happening, what's happening. And so Iditarod is the same thing. In general, we are encouraging the back of the pack to finish. Sometimes they have to make a little bit of fire underneath their butt and say, like Gerhard now, Greg
Vitello.
Greg, it's like, Greg, resting 11 isn't an option. If you want to finish, you need to up the ante a little bit here and rest 7, you know, run 6, rest 7, rest an hour longer. But, you know, if you keep on running 4 or 5 and resting 11, this is not going to work. You're too far behind. So you do things like that, you know, and then you might even talk to somebody about efficiency and say, like, way back in the day, John Baker actually came to me once and said, Sebastian, how many times did you walk to the front of your team? And I was like, what the fuck do I know? What the fuck do I care? And he was like, oh, you need to care. You know, so, and that's it. You might have to walk these people through routines and get them to finish. Now, that all switches when you have a case like Hugh Neff last year. Now I'm getting in real dangerous waters here.
Hey, hot takes. We like hot takes, okay? So we appreciate that.
Yeah, hot takes. I already saw Hugh's team not eating very well in Rainy Pass last year. And at the time, you know, I talked to Hugh. Him and me go back a long ways of running both races. And I talked to him. I was like, hey, Hugh, they're not eating all that well. And he was rather nonchalant about it, you know. And at that point, okay, I backed off. I was like, you know, okay, he hopefully got the gist. You know, you got to be very diplomatic, so to speak. You know, I had hoped that me saying that made him aware that we are watching. You know, then I saw his team in McGrath again, and I could see a change in appearance in dogs. You know, you can see dogs getting stronger. You can see dogs losing weight. Well, that team was losing weight. And obviously, I'm not the only race judge out there. You know, there are many other race judges. And we were all starting to see the same thing. That's why the decision, which was very unpleasant and created a lot of controversy, was done in Ruby. While Mark Nordman is a poor guy who takes a brunt for all of that. But that was not a single Mark Nordman random, oh, I'm going to pull the hell you out of the race now. No, that had nothing to do. Us race judges talk amongst each other. We relay to Mark Mark calls us, and says, hey, what did you see there? What did you see here? That was a very joint decision by many of us judges together, seeing the progression of the team, that it was still running fine, but the vets have a lot to say with that too. But when the body weights start going down and the dogs are not eating well, and you're that early in the race, after all, just arriving at the Yukon River is early in the race, with a musher who has had dog incidents before, who has been shut down in races before, that's when the very unpleasant choice was made to make that decision. Which, if you make that with a front runner like you, oh boy, what the fans, oh my God, fans comes from fanatic. What turned that loose? The fans who sit in Ohio or God knows where on their computer seem to know more than us race judges do. Where, as a race judge, I'm often, why the hell am I even out here? Why don't we leave the decision for the fans who know it all so well, So it's a very judgy subject and a very unpleasant subject, and you have mushers, when you give them the talk, like I was given the talk in the 99 Quest by Joe May. I was upset, but I realized, well, the guy knows more than I do. I better listen to him, Or then you have other mushers, when you give them the talk and I was the one scratching Lance in the 2013 Quest. So in Dawson, when Lance scratched, he saw me just walk up to him, and Lance was like, Sebastian, you're here to give me some paperwork, aren't you? And right there, he knew, so with Lance, there wasn't even the need for I think he was down to 7 dogs or 8 dogs in Dawson. There wasn't even a need for a discussion. Lance himself, he saw what he needed to see and did the decision he had to do. But those are the times when, as a race judge, the unpleasant moments happen. 95% of the time, the job is different. The job is facilitating and helping people to finish. A Hugh Neff, a trainee, I don't know how many times finisher, should know better. People who are in the first or second race, competitiveness is usually not the issue, or being over competitive. It's more about making sure they finish and they get to reach their goal, their dream, especially when the going gets tough. Because how tough it goes, I remember reading books and stories and race annuals, and Ken Anderson used to write really great race updates, and I read them all. But Sean, as you know, they only get meaning once you have been out there. For you too, you must feel the same thing now, that things you read before, now that you ran the race, they have a lot more meaning.
Yeah, man. I'm just really glad that you've talked about what you've talked about. I think that the Iditarod is always going to have critics that, speaking of people that sit in Ohio, that they haven't come and seen these sled dogs and seen how happy they are. And, the dogs that get left home, those are the ones we feel bad for, not the ones that get to go and do this race. And when people are, not doing right by the dogs, there's actions that get taken, and no longer being able to continue in the race, like you see with Lance in 2013, the Quest, or Hugh a year or two ago. And it's difficult, and it's not like Hugh could maybe come back, and if he has a little bit of remorse or proves, I don't know what that situation is, but I would think that if maybe he could take some fault, there could be potential for a comeback story there. But yeah, I mean, can't see a pattern of, issues with your dog hair continue over and over, right? And it's people miss things. You make mistakes, you maybe, but you can't have it happen over and over again, right? This is all about the dogs here, right? And yeah, of course, you want to get people to complete their dreams, get out there on the Iditarod Trail and finish the damn race. I've got a really close friend who's been, got withdrawn from the race, and I've scratched. It sucks, and that was really hard for me, and I still I'm never gonna get over that, and so yeah, I feel for Jen LaBar, that was a gnarly wipeout, and I think the only time ever Mitch Seavey scratched, it was for a similar reason.
His knife, yeah, when
Yeah.
he stabbed it with a knife, yeah. No, but everybody's signing up. You do know that a certain percentage of mushers doesn't make it, and you got to be in acceptance of that. I mean, I scratched my first quest, and life went on. The possibility is there, and that's why, once again, the ultimate goal as a race judge is to get the people to the finishing line. It ends when it's not done right by the dogs. And unfortunately, sometimes there seem to be, very rare times, there seem to be disagreements about that assessments, like last year between Hugh Neff and the vets and Nordman and us as race judges, And those are the cases. In the old days, prior social media, when I got that talk in '99, nothing blew up in the media or anything. No damage was done to the race or Musher or sponsors. Those things stayed behind closed doors, where, in my opinion, they belong. That is the danger of social media, that if that Musher is disgruntled and then takes to social media, as Hugh did, he does a lot of damage to himself and the race. And that has made the whole race judging. I mean, I can't even believe there is a Facebook page out there, get rid of Mark Nordman. I mean, if these people would know the knowledge the guy has, the connection he has, the devotion he has to the race and to the mushers to get them to the finishing line, I can't even fathom it. What's happening here in this world all of a sudden, where the referees are the bad people. Even in a case like Hugh Neff, which has a set track record of dog issues, and if the referee safeguards the dogs and yet he's being made out as a bad guy, I just don't get it. Has Mark done a mistake in his career or two? Or of course, like anybody else. But the same should apply to him than to the mushers and anybody else. Somebody in the end has to make the ultimate decision. And in this case, it happens to be him. And to me, I have to admit, that was actually even part of why I didn't want to be a judge this year. Where I was like, why would I do it if it's not fun? It's a lot of hard work. We don't sleep much out there neither. And then to have that amount of negativity, well, I can go snow machining on my own. I'm going up to the Percy de Wolf tomorrow just to take some pictures, and I think the whole community has to look at that. What does the criticism do to the whole mushing community?
We all want the same thing, we all want the dogs to be taken.
But what has happened with social media? Like, what is that amount of negativity? As great as social media is to get updates, pictures, live videos, and so on, I also think it has a certain detriment for the races, because all of a sudden everything is out open in the public. which is not even the case in a family. All of a sudden, the Mushers are in a 10-day reality TV show without even signing up for it, because everything is out in the open. And, me doing media a lot of times too, I even have a problem with that. And I think it's you got to be really careful when you're out there. What do you show and what do you not? Because like anything else in the life, not everything should be for public consumption. Does it mean we're hiding things? No, but it's not all family life belongs to the neighbors. So with this mushing community being supposed to be the Iditarod family, how do we treat each other? And especially, how do we treat each other in the difficult times, in the HUNEF times? How do we treat each other? Nobody is going to make these calls lightly. A Mark Nordman, myself or Karen Ramsted or whoever, we don't get a pleasure in sending somebody home. Oh, hell no. Absolutely not. Why the hell would we? Same thing with the Musher way in the back of the park, where all of a sudden you're too far behind. It would be disheartening sending that person home. But at some times, certain situations, you're running out of options. So it's that whole thing is a pretty touchy subject. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate you talking about it. It's tough for me to talk about. I don't understand the whole picture, and I think that I definitely understand the picture a lot better than whoever's commenting on Facebook or whatever, but I still don't fully grasp it. I don't really truly know what those difficult conversations the judges are having. And I've had some of those difficult conversations in my couple of races, and I know, and I want to be respectful of your time here, and I just think I'm going to ask you one more question. And
I think I gotta ask. I have a good way to wrap us up. I got a good wrap way, but go ahead with your question.
But like, when it comes with the Iditarod, we have like a lowest amount of mushers in the race this year. What can we do for the race? Like how are we gonna get it to be continuing on this legacy of sled dogs and mushing in Alaska, and something that's been going on for thousands of years, and this event's a celebration of it and of the trail and of the dogs, and that we all, and the love that we all have for them. I hope that me and Brennan just being able to talk to you is like one thing that we can do to just maybe part of the next generation. We're seeing a lot of these younger mushers in the race this year. It's awesome to see, but we want this awesome event to continue to happen for decades to come. And what do you think people can do to make that, to help do their part?
Ooh, this could be a whole section in its own.
Yeah, I know.
Another recording on this one.
All right, another hour. We're going 3 hours now.
Before you called, I thought, this is going to be a quick 15-minute interview, and I'm on my way to Whitehorse. Because I still have to go to Whitehorse here tonight to head up to the Percy tomorrow morning. But no, this is fascinating, interesting. This is not an isolated Iditarod problem.
Say that again?
The low starting numbers is not an isolated Iditarod problem. It's not an isolated Yukon Quest problem neither. Most races have that situation right now. We've had the same talk this year after the Wyoming stage race. The silver sled race in the Yukon, a short 100-miler, with a super fun overnight camping, is not happening this year. Percy the Wolf has super low participants. We wanted to do a little race here last week, the Granger Grind. We couldn't even find 5 mushers. So I think, for one, we have to look away from the organization and once again stop the bashing of, oh, the old boys club and so needs to leave and this one needs to leave. It's a bigger problem. And I think the problem lies in demographics and society. For every 4 mushers retiring, 1 new kennel starts up. Why is that? And what can be done to combat that should be the real question. Because the lowering numbers in mushers are all across the board. In recreational races, the Iditarod, the mother of it all, the stage race, even some sprint races. Sprint races as such are easier for people to train and maintain in real life. We had those talks with the pedigree stage stop when that went from an Iditarod qualifier to 1 or 2 campouts to 50-mile runs to now be a multiple-day sprint race. But Buddy Streeper said the other year, Sebastian, at least I can bring my kids to the hockey game now, and at least I can have a real Christmas. This long distance racing, as you and I know all too well, it's all consuming, all money, all resources, all family, all everything. Who can do that these days financially? You know, when I showed up in the Yukon, property was so much cheaper. I could still find a property to keep a dog team without annoying my neighbors. Now, here in the Yukon, somebody moving up here like Connor McMahon, he can't buy a property. Average price, $650,000. And that's not even a rural residential property you need to find. How are you going to pull that off? So we are in a real demographic shift where when the real old guard, sorry, Jeff, sorry, Martin, but when the real old guard showed up, they still had a much more of an ability to build a lifestyle, a dream. Now, just to get off the starting blocks is so much harder. And thank God they are the Jeffs and Martins. How many mushers have run because of thanks of them, who have been handlers, who have had their teams. But for them to establish and to start a kennel, find a property and finance it, it's not near as easy as it used to be. So there is a real problem right there where, in all honesty, I don't have an answer. None. I'm seeing it, but I don't have an answer. But the same comes when it comes to the new demographic of mushers. The other day here, when the Granger grind didn't happen, and then once again, Facebook comments started happening, all of a sudden it's like, well, you need to consult us earlier. We need to find out more about the purse. You need to consult us more for the format and so on. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to have anything to do with this. I used to see it as a privilege if there was a race and I was given the platform to run it. But to ask for this race to be centered around my needs would have not crossed my mind. And the younger generation, at least quite a few of them, seem to see that a whole lot different. And that in itself, I see as a difficulty. The rough and tough of what I used to enjoy about the long distance races, sleeping outside, being uncomfortable, having the whole thing be a grind, I think the whole society as such gets away from rough and tough. Whole society is getting softer. And so are we offering a product being the race, which is really becoming out of fashion? And those questions we have to ask ourselves. Clear is the financial ability to run these races is definitely getting lower lately. I got $39,000 for 10th place in 2008. Look what they're getting now. Look where inflation has been since then. So never mind getting to the starting line, finding a property. Add to that a whole different mindset of a lot of up-and-coming mushers. Boy, we are at a difficult road here right now. We are at a real difficult road here right now. If I have to consult mushers first, if the race is to their liking, that's going to get interesting. And we're talking about a little 100-mile race here.
Jeez.
So honestly, I have a lot of question marks. I have absolutely no answers. So hopefully I laid out what I'm seeing, but solutions, there's one solution I see. Stop publicly bad-mouthing race staff, race organizers, race judges, veterinarians. Behave like a family who gets along. That will help a little bit. But in the big picture, honestly, I don't know where this is headed. It's gone are the days of 2008 where we have to ask for a cap of 100 teams, because there was discussions.
Jeez.
Lance, me, and a whole bunch of us would camp out at headquarters so we could start up on the first day and get an early starting number. We would camp there for 3 days and drink beer. Well, those days have gone by.
Oh man, to have been around you guys in that era, that would have been something to be a part of. But Sebastian, we can't thank you enough. Your knowledge is amazing. The depth that you are able to provide when we ask you just like a basic question is through the roof, and we can't thank you enough. The one last thing I wanted to do, which is probably something that I should have brought up at the front of the podcast, but Sean was telling me about the story about how you guys met. And I was wondering if, before Sean tells it, if his side or whatever, if you happen to remember meeting Sean and what the circumstances were.
Oh boy.
I don't think so. Yeah, you see, I mean, how many times?
The thing is where I first consciously met you and you first consciously met me. So where did I first consciously meet you? Honestly, I honestly don't know.
Yeah, I remember it pretty vividly because I haven't met.
How bad did I piss you off? What did I do?
No, I was in Tacotna down in one of those Glorious Burgers, and I was talking with, gosh, I'm embarrassed, I can't remember her name, but she was running the Iditarod, and she ended up not being able to finish. But you sat down, and I was like, you have a look to you. I also have crazy hair, but I did just shower.
Hey, you put product in your hair. What is that?
No,
about,
it's
man?
Just wet. I showered.
I was hoping you would try to give Sebastian some competition.
But yeah, you were saying what you said earlier in the podcast, which was just, there's nothing like your first time on the trail and to enjoy it. And I was stressing out about whatever was going on with my dogs, that they weren't eating every last kibble, or, maybe there was, some harness rub or whatever. And you're just just enjoy. This is your first time. There'll never be another first time. And then I was like, oh, thanks, crazy guy. And then and then I turned to my musher friend, and she's like, oh, you don't know who that is? And I was like, no, I have no idea who this is. And then she kind of said, oh yeah, he won the Yukon Quest, and this is a race judge or whatever. And I was like, oh, okay, well, thank you. And then I learned after the race, and then years to come, I see you around a lot.